There are moments in life where storms tear through without mercy, when what once stood tall and strong is suddenly gone. But time passes, the light returns, and from the ridge where destruction once seemed final, you begin to see something new, a beauty you could never have seen before. In Genesis 41, Joseph's story turns from pain to purpose, but that purpose didn't come without preparation. The famine that followed wasn't an interruption to God's plan. It was the stage where his beauty was revealed. Today, we're studying Genesis chapter 41, one of the most remarkable turning points in the entire book. Joseph, once a forgotten prisoner, stands before Pharaoh as God's chosen interpreter of dreams. The boy who was sold by his brothers, enslaved in Egypt, and unjustly imprisoned, now becomes the instrument through which God will save nations. But it's a story about more than just Joseph's rise to power. It's about preparation, about what God is doing in us long before he ever works through us. It's about how even in tragedy, famine, loss, suffering, the beauty of God's nature still breaks through. Genesis 41 opens with a haunting line. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. 2 years! 2 long, quiet years after Joseph interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. 2 years since he had asked, "Remember me when it goes well with you." But no one remembered him, except God. Those 2 years weren't wasted. They were the furnace of preparation. God was teaching Joseph patience, faith, and humility, tools of every servant who will one day lead. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. Charles Spurgeon once said, "The Lord gets his best soldiers out of the highlands of affliction." And that's what we see in Joseph. The silence wasn't absence, it was preparation. Like Joseph, many of us sit in the quiet, wondering if God has forgotten us. But those seasons refine our hearts, teach us to trust his timing, not ours. Genesis 41:16 tells us, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." When Pharaoh calls Joseph, Joseph doesn't take credit. He says, "It is not in me." That's the heart of someone who's been prepared. Before God elevates us, he humbles us, so that when the time comes, we point others to him. A.W. Tozer wrote, "It is doubtful whether God can bless a man greatly until he has hurt him deeply." The famine was not random. It was redemptive. Through scarcity, God displayed sufficiency. And Joseph, the one who lacked freedom, becomes the vessel of provision for all of Egypt and beyond. I remember standing years after a tornado had torn through the Chattanooga area. At the time of the tornado, it was devastating. Homes destroyed, trees uprooted, lives changed overnight. But standing on the ridge years later, I realized something profound. The view was breathtaking. The very ridge the storm had decimated revealed a sight of the mountains that had always been there, but hidden. That's what God does through tragedy. He reveals what was hidden. The pain of the storm gives way to the beauty of the view. The famine was devastating, but through it, God's glory was revealed. Not just in Joseph's rise to power, but in his provision for the nations. What man saw as ruin, God used for redemption. This is evident in Genesis 41:57. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere. John Calvin once wrote that the provision of God is like a watchmaker's hand, invisible, precise, and unerring. Even in tragedy, God is crafting something beautiful, often unseen until much later. If you've ever wondered whether your pain has a purpose, look at Joseph. Every hardship was a step. Betrayal, slavery, imprisonment, each one shaping him into the man God would use to preserve life. Vadi Bakum once said, God is not interested in our comfort. He's interested in our conformity to Christ. Joseph's story reminds us that divine preparation often feels like delay, but it's the soil where purpose grows. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has informed you of all this, there's no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne I will be greater than you. It wasn't the throne that made Joseph wise. It was the prison. The throne was just where God's preparation bore fruit. God's providence doesn't erase tragedy. It redeems it. And sometimes, what we call loss is simply the clearing away of what blocks our view of His greater beauty. Spurgeon wrote, when we cannot trace His hand, you must trust His heart. That's the beauty of faith. Believing that even in famine, even in silence, even in storms, God's plan is still good. Genesis 1:31 reminds us, and God saw everything that He had made, and behold, it was very good. Even in a fallen world, God's goodness remains woven into the fabric of everything He allows. The famine, the prison, the storm, all become stages for grace. Maybe you're in a season where you feel forgotten, where silence feels like abandonment. But like Joseph, God is preparing you. The waiting is not wasted. The famine may feel like loss, but it may just be the field where His beauty will grow. God used Joseph because Joseph allowed himself to be shaped by God. And when the time came, he was ready, humble, wise, and faithful. Romans 8:28 tells us, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. God doesn't waste your waiting. He doesn't waste your pain. every hardship and every delay and every heartbreak, all of it is the preparation of a faithful God who knows exactly what he's doing. Thank you for joining me today on Apologetically Unapologetic. If this message has encouraged you, I invite you to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to see the beauty in their own story. And to our Patreon subscribers, thank you for helping us to bring biblical truth to life. May God keep you and bless you.